Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be going over all of the changes to Mythic Plus in the upcoming Shadowlands expansion. This is to help those of you that don't want to go searching around for all the individual changes, as there are a lot of them. I will put timestamps to the various categories I'm talking about in the description below. Now let's not waste any time and hop right into the changes to affixes. Starting with the seasonal affix, Awakened has been removed and replaced with a new affix called Prideful. This will be present on any keys that are 10 or above. It will spawn a manifestation of pride every 20% of trash completion, which deals party-wide damage that ramps up the longer it is alive. Think of it like a single target reaping seasonal affix. Once you kill this manifestation, it will give your party a buff that increases your damage, healing, move speed, and mana regen for 1 minute. So it's another Kiss Curse type affix, and it's very fun to play with on beta. It's definitely one of the better seasonal affixes that they've put out so far. We also have some new affixes which are replacing old ones. Teeming and Skittish have been removed, and in their place we have Storming, Inspiring, and Spiteful. Storming is kind of like the melee version of Volcanic, where mobs will spawn tornadoes around them that spin in a circle, similar to the mobs from King's Rest. If you get hit, you'll take a chunk of damage and will be slightly knocked back. Inspiring gives certain mobs throughout the dungeon a buff, which makes other mobs near them immune to CC and interrupts. This works a lot like the Emissary of the Tides ad from Season 3 of BFA, except that the Inspired ad itself is not immune to CC, so you can CC it. Spiteful is another on-death affix that acts a little bit like the Thing from Beyond that came with High Corruption in 8.3. When a mob dies, a Spiteful Shade spawns from its body and will fixate a random player. These mobs are targetable by all party members and can be killed or CC'd. They will also lose 8% of their max health every second that they are alive. If it ends up making it to its fixated target, they will melee them for a ton of damage, so you'll want to avoid that. On top of these new affixes, there are also some old affixes that have seen some changes. Starting with Bursting, its damage now scales with Keystone level rather than a percent of your max HP. It is also now a magic effect, so it can be dispelled by healers and by priests with Mass Dispel. This is aimed at making the affix easier to deal with on lower key levels and more difficult on higher ones. Grievous also saw similar changes, where it now also scales with key level instead of HP percent. On top of this, non-periodic heals now remove an application of Grievous if a player has more than one stack. Note that the final stack can only be removed if you put a player above 90% HP. This is basically just a buff to non-Resto Druid healers for this affix. Volcanic saw a damage reduction from 40% of max HP down to 20% of max HP, and it now also knocks up the player into the air for about 3 seconds, making it much more important to dodge. Sanguine saw its duration slashed, down to 20 seconds now from 60 seconds in BFA. Finally, Explosive was changed to have the orb spawn slightly further away from enemies. With all the affixes covered, let's move on to consumable changes. Starting with buffs, the scrolls are now gone. You will need a priest, warrior, or mage in your group to get their respective buffs. On top of this, lustrums have been nerfed. They now only provide 15% haste, down from 25% haste. This means if you want the full 30% haste granted by Bloodlust, you'll need to bring a hunter, mage, or shaman. For Battle Res, there is now an engineering item on beta that covers this in case your party doesn't have a DK Druid or Lock. However, do note that it does have a chance to kill you when used. Moving on to potions, Shadowlands is bringing a functionality change. All potions, whether they're primary stat, mana potions, HP potions, invisibility potions, or anything else, will have a 5-minute cooldown that starts immediately when used, even if you're in combat. This means for Mythic Plus, if you're potting in dungeons, you won't be able to use as many as you could in BFA, but they will be much easier to use as you won't need to worry about timing pre-pots. A couple of exceptions to this rule are Hellstones and the Kyrian Phial of Serenity, which each have their own unique 3-minute cooldown. That wraps up consumables. Let's take a look at loot. First, we have the new Great Vault system. Basically, You'll be offered more choice in your weekly chest based on both how much content you did and the level of content that you did. This will hopefully make your weekly disappointment chest stop being a disappointment. So for Mythic Plus players, completing 1 dungeon gets you 1 piece of loot, 4 dungeons gets you your second piece, and 10 dungeons in a week gets you a third piece of loot to choose from. Again, this is just a choice. You don't get 3 pieces of loot, you get to pick 1 of the 3. The item level of the loot you get is determined by the lowest dungeon out of your top X dungeons. So if you completed 3 15s, 1 12, and 6 10s, your first loot option would be from a 15, your second loot option would be from a 12, and your third would be from a 10. All these loot options come from the dungeon loot table, and you cannot get 2 pieces of the same loot in the same week. If you aren't interested in taking any of the options presented, you can instead opt to get a large chunk of anima. In terms of drops, this has also seen a nerf from Blizzard with their change in philosophy on gearing. You will instead now see 1 piece of loot in the end chest when you complete a dungeon, and a second piece of loot if you finish it in time. When it comes to loot eye level, we've got this chart that shows us what each level will give at the end of dungeon and in the weekly vault. For reference, the Castle Nathria raid gives 187 gear on LFR, 200 on normal, 213 on heroic, and 226 on mythic. Given these numbers, we see that the highest end of dungeon reward from 15s gives 210 gear, which is 3 eye levels lower than heroic. This is a slight nerf to players who only do Mythic Plus, but this should only affect gearing in the early parts of the season. In the long run, it will actually be much faster to get your character geared in full Mythic eye level gear thanks to the additional loot options provided by the weekly vault. Last but certainly not least, let's take a look at the Cosmetic Rewards for Mythic Plus in the first season of Shadowlands. For Keystone Conqueror, which is completing every dungeon on a plus 10 in time, you'll get the title The Sinful. For those of you that complete Keystone Master, which requires you to finish every dungeon on a plus 15 in time, you'll unlock the Sin Touch Deathwalker mount, which kind of looks like the Torghast version of the Mythic Jaina mount and is something I am very excited to get my hands on. And with that, that covers all of the changes to Mythic Plus going into Shadowlands. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and are interested in more content like this moving forwards into Shadowlands, please subscribe. Also, if you're interested in keeping up to date with the Shadowlands beta, you can check out my weekly beta roundups on my channel. You can also follow me on my Twitter or on my Twitch at Tactics, where I plan to stream high Mythic Plus keys in Shadowlands and potentially some beta content leading up to then. Thanks once again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.